My personal goal is that I think in the next 2 years, Bitcoin's going to get litigated on. And the number one thing that will make Bitcoin legitimate and successful is successful businesses in this space. I think that the most important thing that we could do is create a framework that just helps and facilitates as many projects and businesses to be built in the space. Because ultimately, when it comes down to is, if we can say you're going to kill 30,000 jobs, then they're not going to make it illegal. As it relates to the Satoshi Square project, Josh said, I have an idea. Let's do an open outcry. He came to one of my meetings where he pitched the idea. And then over the course of about an hour and a half, everyone, like the 40 of us, communally talked about making it a reality. Actually, that's where it got its name. Actually, if you remember from your last session, you had a guy, Kirill Gurov, who bought from New York to the LA Bitcoin. He was the one who actually named Satoshi Square. I wouldn't say that I'm the progenitor of the idea, but I have been with it since its inception.
I think that you pointed something interesting out there. A lot of these things are collaborative, right? It's like it's not one person's idea. It's you get an idea and then you bounce it around with a bunch of other people. And, through that echo chamber, you wind up with something that actually is a really good idea that's actually pretty actionable, too. So, I mean, it seems like that's what happened here more than anything. You're trying to build something, but ultimately how it gets built isn't the most important part. It's just important to build.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's how business works. You need to have a group of 150 people who all know everyone in that group and have some level of trust with those individuals. And then you can build amazing things very rapidly out of that.
The NYC meetup group, how long have you been a thing?
So it's called the NYC meetup group, but I've always tried to stress, it's just people don't hear it when I say it, is that it's a professional networking group that has its meetings for free, and we use Meetup to meet up, but it's not a meetup group. But I guess it's easier to just call it a meetup group.
Well, but, when we talk about meetup groups, the group is almost superfluous. The point is meetup, and to me.
Yeah, as it relates to Meetup, so we've been doing it we're on our 15th week. We've had 16 meetings. We've never had a meeting go less than 4 hours, just to let you know the interest.
Wow.
The Financial Times piece is just one result of interactions with the community.
How did the Financial Times piece come about?
What ended up happening was, if you build a road, they will come. Eventually, someone was just like, hey, I need to understand who to interview for Bitcoin. Can I come to a meeting? And I was like, absolutely. And then that was that. And then the rest is history. And then he just loved the group so much. And I ended up chatting with him on like an hour and a half about philosophy. And then he just said, well, I'm going to go to a Satoshi Square meeting, and then I'm going to get my photographer to come and do a shoot on you guys in 2 weeks. And we were like, awesome. I actually had, this week alone, including you guys, I've had 5 interview requests for the group. I actually try to serve as a facilitator of the community. The thing that I tell reporters, and I'm getting a lot of referrals now, is that I'm probably not the guy you want to interview, but through developing this group, I know for a fact the perfect person for you to interview. Stuff like that is what we're doing. As it relates to community outreach, it's growing pretty massively, which is why I have high hopes for the press release day. Actually, just to let you know, Mark and Bailey are actually they're regular meetup attendants.
That's great.
Yeah,
fantastic.
It was actually funny because Mark came and he was asking us how to do cold storage, and he came out to like 2 or 3 meetings, and I was giving him advice on Bitcoin. And then he was like, hey, come out to this conference where you're going to pay $300 to hear my Bitcoin analysis.
Yeah.
You son of
Joining me today, we have Jonathan Mohan from the Bitcoin New York group. Now, you identify more as a networking group, right?
With Bitcoin NYC, we're striving to become New York City's professional networking group for all things Bitcoin related. When it comes to the finance types in New York, you kind of have to add a couple extra words to your meetup group for them to respect you. So that's kind of where I'm coming from on that.
Now, you guys have been doing this for a while, longer than most of the Bitcoin meetup groups out there. So what's kind of been the process? Did you start off with nobody attending and you've reached points where you're happy with the numbers, or did it start off with a lot of interest? What's been the journey, so to speak?
I would say, surprisingly enough, we weren't one of the first. We are the most consistent. About 3 months ago, I just made a Facebook group, and we got 30 members in a day. And I said, hey, on Thursday, every Thursday, let's meet up at this Starbucks. We had 8 people come out, and the one thing that has never changed, despite the location or the people, is that every Thursday at 6 p.m. we have a meeting. And I think that level of consistency allows a community to be formed around it.
we're starting a Napa Valley meetup group, and we're doing it once a month. We've got our second one coming up, and it's again looking like it's going to be a little bit shaky on attendance. So you think that it's about the weekly, it's about the being able to have consistency and start to build a community that makes it accessible.
Well, it's about what you're trying to get out of the group, and I suggest to everyone to do a weekly group, because if you want relationships to be formed, you can't do that in a monthly capacity. It needs to be weekly. The reason I say consistency is the most important thing is because there are very few things in life that are dependable. And once you have yourself implanted in someone's mind as something that they can depend on, they start to plan around you. So now that the group for 3 months has met every single Thursday, we have people who plan months in advance around the fact that at Thursday night we will have a meeting. And you just can't get that if you don't have consistency.
You've been getting a lot of attention recently. There's a piece running in the Financial Times that actually has very, very nice things to say about the group and you and a few of the other members of it. Again, why do you think that you've been able to get such traction with this idea if you weren't one of the first groups and, you are still relatively new? Because you said that you started the Facebook group 3 months ago?
Correct.
So what types of things happen at these meetups? I mean, if they're that frequent, in the pre-interview, we were talking about how each of the meetings is like 4 hours long. So what is it that you're doing there?
When I think about what I enjoy, it's things that give me value. So I quite explicitly say to every single member, there are going to be no presentations. Everyone at any time has the capacity to speak, and everything is done in a roundtable sort of setting. So if I were to talk to any meetup groups, I would suggest I'll open source my format, I guess. Every single meeting, we ask the same 3 questions in a row. And if you think about it, even if you have 50 people, this only takes 15 minutes, so it's always worth doing. Everyone goes and they say, 1, who am I? 2, what brought me here today? And 3, what specifically do I want to get out of today's meeting? And once every single person has voiced that, myself as the facilitator, it's my goal to make sure that third one is accomplished for every single person by the end of the meeting. And I think that's why we have such an engaged audience, is that we explicitly ask them the type of value that they want to get, and then I personally make sure that they get that resolved by the end of the day.
That's actually a really, frankly, smart approach to it. I think that there's not really a guidebook to creating meetups and to creating these sort of situations where you can have collaboration and, and community. But
Right.
that sounds really interesting. Jonathan, you're younger than a lot of the people who we talk to in the Bitcoin space. How did you find yourself in this position where you're able to facilitate and organize these things?
So I'm 23. As it relates to Bitcoin, I've been aware of it since 2010. And from the voluntarian perspective, I just found it fascinating. So I've kind of been throwing myself into it from that perspective. As it relates to professional groups, I helped charter a professional fraternity at my college, a chapter of a fraternity. So I kind of have a fairly decent understanding of how to form something with 40 people from nothing when no one's getting paid to do it. And I've also been a part of several networking organizations. I kind of have a feel for it, but I just think that the number one thing to do is just understand, how do you wish to have value provided to you, and then how can I do that? Because if you can figure out those 2 questions, then it doesn't really matter what you do or how you do it, because you'll do it right.
So in addition to the professional group, there's also this concept of Satoshi Square and open outcry markets. Can you tell me a little bit how that emerged?
Josh Rossi, who's also in the Financial Times piece, actually came up with this idea. And he came by one of our meetings, and he said, hey guys, what if every Monday I were to just chill in Union Square from 5 p.m. to 7 p.m. and I were just to buy and sell Bitcoin? What would you guys think about that? And because we have an open format, we ended up talking about it for the next hour. We didn't leave the table until we had action steps. I think that if you're trying to do anything, never end a discussion without follow-up actions for everyone to do. And the result was, the following Monday, we all met up and we bought and sold. Actually, the name Satoshi Square came from the idea that, just as with Wall Street and the New York Stock Exchange, we were going to make Bitcoin such a huge thing in the next 5 years that they'd rename Union Square Satoshi Square. And if you have any eagle-eared listeners, Kirill Gurov, who was the transcontinental Bitcoin New York transferee from the LA meeting podcast last night, he was the one who named it Satoshi Square. So a shout out goes to Kirill Gurov for that.
With the Satoshi Square thing, that's a model that was most recently replicated in Los Angeles, and I think that, to my knowledge, that's the second iteration that's happened, not in New York.
Right, that is.
Do you think that this is a model that's going to take off? And do you have any sort of guidance for how to take steps to make it easier for that to happen? I mean, do you think it's just like about a critical mass of people? Because I mean, your group operates out of New York City, and that's a very population dense, very financially savvy, very technologically savvy area. And yet, you're still only talking about numbers that are under 100 people.
Right.
What do you think the path forward is? Just keep doing it and it'll grow over time? Or are you, actively advertising? What's the strategy?
First and foremost, you have to love doing it because you're not going to be making money at it for a fairly long time. So if you just can get a group together, 5 or 6 people, and you just enjoy their company and you say, hey guys, you just want to chill in the park for 2 hours once a week, then all the other things will just grow from that. So that's kind of what we do at Satoshi Square, where we're like, you know what? Even if 3 Bitcoins get exchanged, I love you guys. Let's freaking chill for 2 hours because this is awesome. If you build it, eventually people will get there. If anyone, has something, I'll try to help them market it or help them in any way that I can. But I really think that, it's just consistency and an understanding that you don't get to reap the benefits without sowing the seed, and it takes time. As it relates to the organization of like a Satoshi Square, if you could use like a group texting program like GroupMe, it's like an IM platform for smartphones, so that like if you're kind of in the same area, you can all just have like an instant message space. So like, hey, we're at this side of the park, not that side of the park, or things of that nature, or maybe even use that for now to put bid and asks and just see a stream of it. That's, I think, would be a very important thing.
So in the world of meetups, there are a lot of, I think, things that work and a lot of things that don't work. From your experience, beyond what we've talked about already, what are things that you think that people should absolutely do if they want to be successful in engaging the community in the type of way that you have in New York?
So I know I've harped on it again, weekly consistency. If you just ask people, how can I bring value to you, and make sure that you do that for them at the end of the day, they'll keep coming back. And other than that, just be yourself and don't lie, I guess.
The initial members that you had came from a Facebook group? Was that the only advertising that you did initially to get those 30 people?
So initially, I posted it on Reddit, I posted it on Bitcoin Talk, and then I made the Facebook group, and that was it. And in about one day, I had 30 people.
So it sounds like you've had a lot of successes. Is there anything you've tried that, just has been an out-and-out failure that people should avoid like the plague?
The number one thing that people do wrong is they do presentations. My opinion on the matter is that everyone is always an equal. And if you have something interesting enough that people want to listen, they'll ask you about it. If you ever come out to one of our meetings, what you'll see is people who panel discussions or who do presentations at other meetings who are just participants in the discussion. We're all equals. And if anyone is interested in what they have to say, or if they have a pressing need to say what it is that they wish to say, they'll just say it. There's no need to confine the discussion to some strict format. Our job as meetup group facilitators is to facilitate, not to dictate. Try to provide a platform and just see how the community itself decides how it wants to derive value out of your meetings.
Are there different types of meetings? It sounds like they're more collaboration groups, and community events that you're putting on with this particular one. Do you have anything in mind where you would have presentations where that would fit into the format more so than it does currently?
As it relates to teaching, presentations is something that's just unavoidable. When we have our Bitcoin beginners meetings, those generally have about a 45-minute, an hour-long presentation. And that's just because that serves as a data dump, not a communal participation thing. But as it relates to our format, we spend the first 15 minutes asking everyone those 3 questions. Who are you? What brought you here today? And what value specifically would you like to get out of today? And then we have a communal discussion for about an hour and a half. The most important part is that once everyone has a context of who everyone else is and what their background is, they themselves break out into small groups. You'll have 6 or 7 different highly specific topics that I myself, as a 23-year-old college student, could never have the capacity to be a master in all those fields. The important thing about a successful group is just to build the road and let the group itself come together, I guess.
Yeah, I think that's a really good perspective to have. You're viewing your group and your meetings as like a platform for communication and for collaboration rather than an end unto themselves. Come to our meetup group because you'll learn everything about Bitcoin. It's not really like that. It's a discussion. I really think that's an interesting way to approach it. So listening to some of the audio from the Los Angeles meetup, it seemed pretty clear that there is still some technology that is lacking, which is kind of funny because this is such a technological thing, but it's so early in the life cycle that a lot of the core tools that we'll eventually come to know and understand and appreciate don't really exist yet. From your experience with these various organizations, what do you think the tools that are really lacking and would be beneficial to have developed?
Josh Rossi, the person who kind of came up with this idea of Bitcoin buttonwoods, actually has a project in the works. He hasn't hit version 1 yet, but it's called Project Buttonwood, and it's going to be an Android and an iPhone app that helps you have a reputation score as well as a place to put bids and asks. And I would highly suggest people check that out. If they'd like to help him with that, please do so. I think that right now, one of the things that you could do is use GroupMe. For those who are unfamiliar with that, it lets you kind of have like a group instant messaging platform that anyone can kind of sign on to. Have Satoshi Square in New York, have Project Buttonwood LA or Satoshi Square LA have a group IM platform that they could just all post their bid and asks on and kind of self-gather, so if they change locations, they know where everyone's at.
To that end, I was talking with John Light. He's trying to put together a Satoshi Square in San Francisco right now. One of the things that he was really, really interested in was this idea of having all of these Satoshi Square events be essentially synchronized and networked to each other so that you can have like a global, or at least to start it would just be the US liquidity pool where everybody is basically standing out in the open, trading at the same time, working on the same platform. Do you think that that's the end game here, or do you think that this is more of a local thing? We saw this first cross the country transaction. Is that the future of where we're going?
I personally think that Satoshi Square, the idea behind it is about pretty much 3 things. One is this idea that we just have to be out in public so that people can understand that we're not these, basement dwelling anarchists. We really want to help the ecosystem and we're just regular people. Not that there's anything wrong with that. About knowing that we're here and we're just normal human beings. I would also say that it's important just from a liquidity standpoint. If you want money in 5 minutes, it's pretty much the only way to get it. And the last piece is that based on whatever regulation may arise, person-to-person transactions will always be there. I was listening to your podcast and they're talking that pretty much no matter where this regulation pendulum swings, if you're trying to buy and sell something, the government's never been able to stop one human meeting with another human. And I really think that before that decision can be made one way or the other, it's really important for us to build those human relationships so that should Bitcoin be not as legal as it is right now, we have a countrywide network of people who can still meet in person and buy and sell in Bitcoin.
What do you think of the exchanges? That's kind of the obvious, if you wanted to call it competition. It's not really competition because, like you said, what you're doing is more about almost like public relations than it is about actually trying to have an efficient market mechanism. So do you have an opinion? When you get Bitcoins, when you initially got Bitcoins, have you gone through an exchange?
All of my purchases have been done person to person.
So after doing these various meetings and, these community events and the open outcry market, what have you gotten any pushback from people who didn't understand what was going on and thought you were doing something really weird? Or what has been the response from the community that isn't already up on Bitcoin, and how has that gone?
So just to let you know where I'm coming from, I printed 5,000 business cards for Bitcoin NYC, and pretty much, love it or hate it, I will always give you a card and invite you to come out. I haven't really received any negative feedback. In fact, one of my friends works for the Federal Reserve, and she was speaking to some of her colleagues to have a Bitcoin NYC Fed Reserve kind of lunch meeting with a couple of us just because they themselves are just completely curious about what this whole Bitcoin thing is. So I feel like a lot of the hate that goes to Bitcoin is kind of amplified by the fact that most of us are interacting with one another over the internet, and the internet kind of amplifies all trolls. But, by and large, most people are either skeptical or just plain curious.
So, Jonathan, what's next for you and for kind of the movement in NYC that you're doing your best to steward here?
We're doing a We Are the World Bitcoin edition. So we're going to be recording a song and then asking all the people in this space, like the startups and the meetup groups, to film them singing along to the song and then turn it into a music video. We were hoping to record the chorus at the conference if we can get 15 minutes of the people there to work with us. I'm trying to grow Bitcoin NYC into a community place where you can pretty much talk Bitcoin and come together any day of the week. So I'm actually looking for funding. I applied to the foundation. I'm going to be applying to BFL's fund in the near future so that I can have 16 meetings a month as it relates to Bitcoin. And rather than just have 2 meetings a week like I'm currently having, have 4. Mondays would be Bitcoin beginners. Every Tuesdays would be our founders forum, which is where people who are starting businesses can come together and help one another. Wednesdays would be Web Dev Wednesdays as it relates to programming for Bitcoin. Thursdays are our general meeting discussions, and every month a weekend hackathon. And that would be a full-time commitment for me. So I'm just looking for anyone in the community who's interested in supporting that or being a part of that to reach out to me. And if there's anyone anywhere who wants help just trying to understand this space or needs help building a community of their own, please email me at jonathan@bitcoinnyc.org, and I will do everything that I can for you.
Jonathan, thank you for the work that you're doing and pioneering a lot of these things. I think that the NYC group is a great example of what you can do if you devote your time and you focus on being professional. I think that you're doing great work and it's very important work, so thank you for that.
It's a pleasure.